why. No such thing as proactive anymore, only reactive.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. Toby brings up a point, or Toby says, when you say you will see a drastic change, does that mean that the government will step in and shut this down? I don't know. I don't know either way. I think that depends on who wins. I think if Trump wins, I think he'll be far more assertive in regaining control of these situations. And I think if Biden wins, the left will be appeased and they will slow down or stop on their own. So either way, I think after the election, it could go either way. It really just depends on who wins.
John has a plan to save us all.
Yes, I know John has a plan to save us all. He has. I've heard many of John's plans, and you know what, John? You are absolutely brilliant. You want to come on and share your plan?
Yeah.
Let's see. John's bringing up the fact that he's talking more about peaceful protesters and that angle. And there's something I feel like really compelled to say here. These peaceful protesters, like to all of you guys, if you're listening, you're being used. Like literally your movement, everything you're fighting for is being hijacked because of the people that are hiding right amongst you. And that is a problem. And I don't know how to fix that problem, but I hope that you're aware of it and you would start trying to get these people out of your protests that are turning violent. Because the more that goes on, the worse things are going to get.
He said yes.
Watch this. I don't know if you can still see me.
I can still see you.
Sweet.
Is John Leon? Mimi, I see you. Wickard Lee 2020. No, ma'am. VP, right here.
What was that?
I said Mimi. Yeah, and I said no, ma'am. VP, right here.
If we do our
VP.
makeshift debates, Kristen is my VP candidate because John and I or John and Mike are coming up, or we're going against each other.
And
hey,
also,
John, if you're watching, I sent you the link, so you actually can jump on if you would like to join us.
If you and John Lee ran together, I would have to be somebody in your cabinet. You see him?
No, not yet. This is an interesting. So this guy's, I don't know who you are, but this is Facebook user. It says, John Lee, well, can't you see that if these protests continue to get out of control and Trump is reelected, then he has the authority to bring in martial law, and that this is the actual. So what's interesting about that, so maybe you don't realize this, but he actually has the authority to do that now. I'm actually in some ways surprised that he hasn't. Simply because he could do it now, and the ramifications of doing it now are drastic. I mean, there's a lot that happens when we are under, or when martial law is declared, and he doesn't have to wait till re-election to do it. He could do it now, and there would be no re-election, because it turns out election processes are canceled under martial law. And there is John Lee himself. What's up, Mr. Lee? So you got a plan to save us all.
How we doing?
You should know by now that John Lee always has a plan. Did it freeze on him?
Yeah, you froze with the fingers up, though, right? Like with the peace sign and everything. It was epic.
So here's the issue that we have. On a national stage, right now, the peaceful protesters don't believe that they're getting any recognition. Just like conservatives don't believe that we get any recognition for the things that we do, we often listen to the people that are the most biggest broadcasters out there, right? And what we're seeing is that basically the protests and the rioters are the same thing. They're implicit and complicit in each other, right? Because these rioters are hiding behind peaceful protesters. Okay, here's the problem. The constitutional right that you talked about, peaceful protesters, yes. You know, I have been to many constitutional rallies. You know what? One of my favorite rallies that I ever was at, well, I wasn't at, but I wanted to go to, was Charlottesville. Charlottesville was a hell of a rally. It was very peaceful for the most part. In fact, I'd say it was 99.99% peaceful, 100%. But you know what happened? Somebody violent, somebody interloper, somebody came in that wanted to cause destruction and damage, and that is all anybody's talking about. That is anybody's focusing on. And they tried to discredit all those peaceful people at that rally. They tried to discredit all of their cause, all of their entire things. This is what we don't hear. We don't hear saying, you know, hey, Second Amendment rallies sometimes have white supremacists, a small percentage of them that show up and cause trouble. So now you can't have Second Amendment rallies. So what we really need to recognize on a national stage is that if our government, DC, bipartisan, comes out right now and says, protesters, I hear you. Peaceful people, just the peaceful ones. I hear you. You want peaceful, legal reform. You feel that you need to have a voice that is not being voiced. I get that. Here's what I want you to do. Come to DC. We'll make you a committee. We'll sit down right now, Democrats and Republicans, and talk legal reform across the board. Law enforcement, you're important. I will not let you guys be left behind. You are absolutely vital. In fact, what I'm going to do is we're going to make sure this legal reform gets you the better training, the better resources, the better things that you need to police your community so you're not stressed out, so that you don't have to have all this stuff riding on you. I would say, and you know what? None of this can happen if our cities are burning. You as Americans, I'm telling you, I hear your voice. I will give you a seat at the table. You must out the people that are destroying your movement and discrediting your cause by causing this chaos. Because right now, they feel like they're being completely ignored. So, yeah, we've heard protesters like Lipstick came in and said, hey, you know what? The peaceful protesters pack up and leave. The rioters come out. I'm not really comfortable with the violence, but it does happen. This complicity that we're talking about, this inability for us to engage in there, that comes from believing that their cause is totally degenerating and not reaching the right ears anyways. They can't reverse the actions of these riots. They can't go back to the time where we almost all universally agreed that these issues needed to be looked at a long time ago. I mean, when we used to see cops in the street kneeling, when we used to see all these other people that were backing the peaceful protest before Minneapolis caught on fire.
So
that's why it needs to be bipartisan, and that's why everybody needs to be represented in this situation, including the American people, including law enforcement, including the people that don't believe reparations is 100% the answer. When you give someone a seat at the table, what I'm talking about is saying, yes, this is something that we can discuss because Americans, citizens, are concerned. They're concerned enough to turn out in 2 million strong across the nation for legislative change. And I promise you right now, any leader right now that is not actively working for de-escalation, actively talking to their constituents to not make this worse, to not feed the hate, to not go out there and rally for it. I want to see the leaders' actions. Those are the leaders that are a problem. This administration, I'm not saying specifically about this administration or this other administration or anything. I'm talking about DC as a whole construct. They have the power right now to turn all this off. And all they got to do is do what we've asked them as conservatives to do for years, and to see the individuals that are doing it right as their own separate entity and not to be drugged down by the criminal behavior done by criminal. Just like gun owners, just like anything else, man. If you are peacefully protesting, you're not the fucking enemy. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Anyways, but when we look at these violence
on live TV, buddy.
when we look at this violence, when we look at this, for instance, this video is horrible. Everybody involved in that video that hurt that person or prevented him from leaving, criminal.
So who is antagonizing the violent protesters? We saw in Los Angeles, it was the police officers, random people who do not have the valid reason for inciting crime and violence. Who is backing them? Who hired them? So that is a lot of statements all in one. But I would encourage you, I unfortunately it says Facebook user, but I would encourage you to realize that you cannot use peaceful protesters with a lot of those terms. Okay, there is a difference, first and foremost, and whether it's on the right or the left, we have to be willing to recognize that there are those parts on each side. So now, do police sometimes instigate the violence? Yep, seen that. We've all seen that. You know, do the protesters sometimes, or do the rioters instigate the violence sometimes? Yep, we've seen that.
Sometimes.
There's plenty of fault to go around, you guys. We don't have to sit here and point fingers at people. Hey, Denitra, sorry, it says Facebook user. So there's plenty of fault to go around. We do not have to point the finger at one side and only one side. We can just simply accept the fact that both sides are responsible for how we got to this point. And the real question becomes, how do we get away from this point? How do we pull it back to where we can come back together and we can have a rational conversation and we can make the changes that need to be made for the benefit of everybody, including law enforcement, including, protesters. And then also, how do we find these rioters and the people that are responsible for violent crimes against other human beings and try them and charge them appropriately? Any thoughts on that one, John?
Absolutely. We need DC to come to immediate legislative compromise that's bipartisan. It needs to acknowledge law enforcement. We will not leave our law enforcement behind. I'm a patriot. I don't believe in the abolishment of police. I believe they have the hardest job in the world. But
All right,
I
Lindsay.
believe...
Go ahead and finish, John. You believe what?
I believe that right now, the only thing that can stop this, it's not patriots can't stop this to a certain extent. Is your citizens can't stop this. And that's what they tell you. And that's the big sign that we should all be seeing, the big red flag. They say, you constituents must rise up and take your country back. You constituents must take the power into your own hands. You constituents, blah, blah, blah. No, you leaders need to sit down and start writing some laws. You leaders need to call the Congress into session and don't leave there until America stops burning. You need to do your job that we hired you for. You need to do this, and you need to do it now. And you do have to appeal to all Americans, not just your favorite ones. Our leaders need to act.
Lindsay's asking, how? And yeah, how is difficult. The best way to get how in local areas, it's to start petitioning your governors, get involved with your senators, your representatives, and start making your voices be heard in your local areas. Especially if you live in Portland or Los Angeles or any of those places, you have got to demand that the government, your local government, do exactly what they're there to do, first and foremost. On the national scale, it is a much bigger thing. It's much harder to pull that off. Now, they call them Antifa and BLM. Hold on, there was one.
Two different groups.
Yeah, they are.
I have a question for both of you. Why do you think,
or go ahead.
Why do you think it is that we as American people aren't as involved when it comes to actually making real change? Like, I know a ton of people who will sit there and argue all day long, but they don't even vote. So why do you think that is?
We're complacent. We're complacent with our lives. We're busy going to work. We're busy doing what we do. And we figure out what the hell, no big deal. And this is exactly, and we're very well distracted and very easily divided, so that's why I think most people don't get involved on the level that they probably should be getting involved. But that's the reality that I see. John?
I think really it's the same thing. A lot of people have not realized that the government is supposed to work for us. A lot of people don't remember that it is government by the consent of the governed. And so whenever you see the situation where people aren't voting and where people aren't doing these things, like, how many people tell me on a daily basis that if I don't vote for the Republicans or the Democrats, then I don't have a vote, that it's a waste. And the fact that people don't think that is a national travesty and a complete antithesis to the American dream are dreaming themselves. Because I'm telling you right now, We don't care enough to make sure that this doesn't happen. There's a power monopoly going on between Dems and Republicans. They've been trading our country back and forth for years. And what do we see? We see a steady increase of inaction. And so we feel like we're not heard. We're told the popular vote doesn't matter. We're told this, that, and the other thing. There's voting fraud, there's national partisanship. It really becomes this convoluted tale where the American people are depowered by their own thoughts. They believe that they cannot create change. They do not believe that voting for school district board member or whatever, or voting for mayor, or voting for police chief, or voting for all these things matter. And then they get to the national stage and we talk about presidents. You know, we'll back our presidents fiercely on Facebook. We'll fight to the death for them or whatever, but we don't think our vote really matters when it comes to them. And in a way, it kind of doesn't. You know, anybody who does not vote for the two big names is a protest vote. And that should alarm every American.